George, I want to start with you because you have a piece out on the FT, the online, just today. And one of the things that you say is that this is not a conventional trade spat. You say it is about existential matters, such as the struggle for technological leadership, mutually accepted rules and regulations in industrial policy, and national security. I think this is what businesses and financial markets are most concerned about, that this is not a short-term spat, but a longer-term existential conflict. What leads you to that conclusion?
Well, I just think, if you look at China over the last 30 or 40 years, once upon a time it was, a wonderful global customer. Then it became a very feisty competitor. And now it's all of those things, but it's also an adversary, particularly of the United States. But I think in Europe we also feel many of the things that are going on within the Beltway as well. So my feeling is, this is not like the terms on which the United States is trading, for example, which describes the concerns that the White House has over Canada and Mexico and a few other countries as well. This is really about much more substantive issues in a country that America perceives as an adversary.
And Deborah, what about from your perspective? You talk a lot with Chinese leadership. You have a sense of what's going on. Do they see it as a longer-term conflict rather than just a simple transactional conflict that will be resolved in a matter of 60, 90 days?
The Chinese for a long time have thought that there was a need to change our policy, and I think the administration has been very clearly focused on that. I mean, we've essentially had the same China policy for the past 30 years, but China has changed significantly. And the administration has made clear that this isn't just about a trade spat. I mean, it's not just about resolving the 301 and the tariff issue. They're looking at Chinese investment practices. They're looking at the students who are coming here who are potentially spying on the United States. They're looking at China's foreign policy, not only with the United States, but globally. And so it's very clear that the administration's put a whole range of issues on the table, and the Chinese leadership is looking at that and thinking about how they respond, not just on the trade conflict, but on the whole range of issues in this changing relationship between the United States and China.
100%, Deborah, which leads me to ask, what support does President Xi have on this front when some estimates for what this trade war could mean for GDP are quite significant the further out you go?
Yeah, there's a whole range of speculation about what this is going to do for the Chinese economy. One thing that's clear is they have at least changed from relying significantly on exports and are much more driven by consumption now, although government investment is sort of the big question out there. The economy has grown by that previously through the government increasing its investments. Certainly after the financial crisis, we saw a lot of that. And the question is now, can they afford to do that since they're going into debt? But they've been very actively looking for new export markets, new import markets. They've been courting the Middle East, they've been courting Africa, they've been courting certain countries in Latin America and Europe to try and diversify away from reliance on the United States.
So, George, I wonder the extent to which this is a true fundamental conflict of status or stature as opposed to conduct or behavior. In this sense, there's a perception, I think, in some parts of China that really what Donald Trump wants is for them not to pass the United States in their prominence as an economy, which obviously the Chinese cannot possibly tolerate. I'm not sure that's doable. Or are there things that actually China could do in terms of behavior that could satisfy the United States?
Well, I think it's much more difficult now, David, than I think it would have been perhaps early this year or even last year. And I think what's going on in China now is a reflection of the hubris which has basically run through the veins of the Communist Party and through the government in recent years, where they kind of thought, they didn't think very much about what other people thought about what they were doing, particularly in areas of industrial policy and particularly this particular policy of Made in China 2025, which is this aspiration to become, the world's technological leader eventually, and sort of aided and abetted by subsequent policies on AI and so on. So I think, the issue really is, is whether China can now make concessions or basically they're not going to give up on what they regard as their sovereign rights to determine industrial policy at home and technology policy, but can they make concessions without appearing to climb down in the face of American pressure? That's why I think the off-ramp is quite a long way away.
Well, exactly. And Deborah, come back to that very point. I mean, from my going to China over the years, they always say, no, we're not a major world power at all. We're not a major economic power. And then we saw President Xi come out in that last speech in the 19th Party of Congress with a very different tone, saying, we've arrived, we're a major world power. Can he climb back down off of that? And is there any doubt within the regime about the wisdom of that approach?
Well, President Xi certainly has taken a very different tact on foreign policy than his predecessors. And it's kind of no surprise at one level when Chinese companies are very rapidly expanding their presence globally, foreign policy is naturally going to change. On the off-ramp, I think certainly there's opportunity for that. You can see that there's a potential deal that's out there that could be a combination of reducing the tariffs, increased market access for U.S. companies, and increased purchases by the Chinese. But ultimately, it's going to take, quite honestly, a deal that's done between President Xi and President Trump. And we're a long way from getting there, given the current atmosphere and the fact that the two sides aren't really just talking to each other at the moment.
George, from a company perspective, a Chinese company is going to start just making better products. They can't compete on price. They're going to start going up the value chain. Would that be a possibility here?
Well, Alex, I think, we already have quite a lot of evidence about how Chinese companies, I mean, the days when they did toys and textiles is kind of a long time ago. So now they're quite adept at competing in kind of middle level, kind of technical quality, computers, software and so on and so forth. So they do a lot of very, very conventional Western products. Having said that, it's still the case that they rely a lot on foreign companies to basically drive that effort, including American companies. And, they still haven't really kind of made the grade, so to speak, when it comes to the really highest level of technological inputs into very, very sophisticated products. So I think that's why this trade, I was going to say a spat, it's more than a spat, it really is a trade war. That's why this trade war is really important, because obviously the Chinese feel that the Americans want to contain them, and obviously the United States feels that China is a threat. So, I hope obviously there will be some opportunity in the future for quiet diplomacy to result in some kind of mutually beneficial way of, resolving this, but it's a way away.